Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for devoting your time to be with us today. In the beginning, there were horses and carriages, no nitrogen or CO2 emissions from cars that would cause harm to our environment. But we aren't in the beginning anymore. In 1963, the Clean Air Act was established as an environmental law designed to control air pollution on a national level after traffic pollution became an issue. Under the Clean Air Act, the Environmental Protection Act is required to regulate the emissions of pollutants that endanger public health and welfare. Hence, the implementation of testing gas emissions from cars. However, as soon as the government began testing vehicle emissions, motor vehicle manufacturers found ways to circumvent these testing procedures. To this effect, Volkswagen managed to falsify the results of their emissions test for about 40 years. Ladies and gentlemen, let me and my team take you down the road of what transpired, how it transpired, what effects it caused, and lastly, how it could have been prevented. It all started when VW decided that a new sophisticated software device, a defeat device, to cheat the emissions test was due for invention. And for that, big ups to VW for fooling and cheating the government for 40 years. Of course, the superiors, as in any case, were supposedly unaware of this, even though it made more money for them. VW had put a device in their cars that would pass them off as fit for the environment, even though the vehicles were, in contrary, not friendly to the environment. Let me introduce you to my team. First up, we have Jason, who will be talking about the irregularities and the facts about the scandal. Then we will have Zahid, who will also add on to the irregularities of the case. Thirdly, we will have Ufenze, who will give us the internal audit as perspective and the role that the internal audit has played, or lack of it, in the case. And I will again be adding on the IA perspective and conclusion. Lastly, we will have Tariro to give recommendations and suggestions on what the internal audit could have done to prevent the scandal. Your host and MC, Newo Divote.
Thank you, Nero. Volkswagen had altered their emissions data for some of their Audi and Volkswagen diesel engine cars by installing a defeat device into the software of the cars, which would work together with the car's ECU, the engine management unit, to detect if the cars were in a test environment by checking the positioning of the steering wheel, vehicle speed and barometric pressure. Then the defeat device would lower the nitrogen oxide emissions of the car by reducing the car performance and fuel economy to match the required nitrogen oxide emissions level as set by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. After the emissions test of the car, the defeat device would revert the car's performance back to its normal performance and increase the fuel mileage. By doing so, it also increased the nitrogen oxide emissions of the car to about 10 to 40 times the allowed nitrogen oxide emissions level as set by the EPA. 11 million cars worldwide were affected by this defeat device. These cars included the Audi A3, Volkswagen Beetle, Golf and Passat. Volkswagen did release a statement in South Africa stating that no cars sold in South Africa were affected by this defeat device. In 2014, a group of scientists from West Virginia University used a portable emissions measurement system to test the Volkswagen Jetta, Volkswagen Passat and the BMW X5 in a real-world setting. They found discrepancies between a test environment test and a real-world test. For the Volkswagen Jetta, the test environment released 0.022 grams per kilometer of nitrogen oxide emissions, and in the real-life test it was between 0.61 and 1.5 grams per kilometer. During their findings, the scientists discovered that the Volkswagen cars exceeded the US emissions limits by 10 to 25 times and reported it to the EPA.
Mr. Wintercom, the CEO of VW America, resigned immediately after pleading guilty to the charges by the EPA. A US federal judge ordered VW to pay $2.8 billion in criminal charges for this offense. The defeat device had an easy fix in which VW engineers would write a code that reprogrammed the defeat device to lower emissions. This would lower performance and fuel mileage, which discouraged VW owners to refit their device. Looking at the health effects of the VW scandal, we see that a peer review study estimated that about 59 premature deaths would be caused by excess emissions because of this defeat device. We also found that the excess nitrogen pollutes the ground level ozone, and these excess particles would cause respiratory problems like asthma and bronchitis that would further lead to heart problems. Now we're going to look at the environmental effects of the VW scandal. It is found that the excess in nitrogen could contribute to smog and acid rain, which is harmful on plants, aquatic animals, and infrastructure. Smog is a heavy fog gas that is harmful to the respiratory functions, and acid rain is a form of indirect pollution that affects soil, water, and snow.
The scandal raises serious questions about the inner workings and possibly ethical practices of VW. During the years it perpetrated this fraud, they constantly portrayed themselves as having an ethical culture, good corporate governance, and a strong commitment to sustainability. But this was not true, as they intentionally violated the Clean Air Act. As a result, they are still paying a high price to recover from the scandal. But the question is, where were the internal auditors? As they are considered to be the eyes and ears of organization, to verify that internal control and processes in place are effective, policies and legislations are adhered to. Well, to date, none of the auditors associated with VW have been publicly identified as being the subject of any investigation connected with the scandal. Although there are still some actions that could have been taken to prevent the scandal, and my colleague Tariro will explain further.
Now we will take a look at what internal auditors could have or should have done in this scenario. As the device was intended to deceive testing procedures, the ethics and governance of the organization comes into question, and henceforth mainly preventative controls could have been used. Their internal audit function should have supported the organization to cultivate an ethical culture. This could have been done through the performance of cultural audits, which would evaluate the ethics of the organization and uncover the presence of a code of ethics, which should have been communicated throughout the organization, upheld by executives, and understood by employees. In addition to this, an assessment of the tone at the top should have been made, as the tone at the top sets the bar for the activities that take place in the company and how they are carried out. Having an ethical tone at the top that is infiltrated throughout the organization could have prevented this scandal. After the scandal erupted, it was discovered that the vehicle analysts that were employed at VW did not compare to global standards. Their internal audit function could have helped avoid this through an HR and payroll audit. Hiring procedures should have been put in place, and qualifications that compare with global standards should have been set as a bare minimum requirement, as VW operates on a global platform. In addition to these preventative measures, the internal auditors could have further enhanced the vehicle testing procedures required for quality control purposes. This would serve the purpose of a detective control. Road check testing for a sample of cars in a real-life consumer condition could have been performed by internal auditors or an independent quality control reviewer who possesses the relevant knowledge.
It is without a doubt that the ethical culture at the top and in the entire organization of VW is questionable. We can assume that whoever inserted the defeat device to cheat the EPA had no integrity whatsoever. We therefore conclude that if VW had strict focus on establishing the correct tone at the top and delivering it down to the entire organization, the scandal would not have happened. Establishing the correct tone at the top is not just for the public eye, but it can also be used as a tool or a strategy to avoid or prevent fraud, which in this case, had it been in place or enforced properly, would have saved VW billions of dollars.